Have you ever been told that you're intimidating, even though you weren't trying to intimidate anyone? Maybe you've heard words like, "You're so quiet, you look serious, I thought you didn't like me." Or perhaps people become strangely nervous the moment they start talking to you. The confusing part is that, from your perspective, nothing unusual is happening. You're simply listening, thinking, being yourself. Yet somehow, other people walk away believing you're cold, distant, or impossible to read. If that sounds familiar, there may be nothing wrong with your personality. In fact, psychology offers a completely different explanation. People aren't always reacting to who you are. Very often, they're reacting to what they can't figure out. The human brain loves certainty. We naturally feel comfortable around people we can predict. People who laugh when we expect them to laugh, speak when we expect them to speak, react the way everyone else reacts. But when someone doesn't follow those unwritten social rules, our brains immediately start searching for answers. Why are they so quiet? What are they thinking? Are they judging me? The less information people have, the more imagination they use. And imagination is rarely neutral. It usually reflects their own fears and insecurities. That's why emotionally independent people are often misunderstood. Not because they're unfriendly, but because they don't constantly send signals asking for approval. Ironically, the qualities that create inner peace often create outer mystery. The calmer you become, the more powerful your presence feels. The less you seek attention, the more attention you quietly attract. This is why some of the most intimidating people in a room aren't the loudest. They're the ones saying almost nothing. Today, we're going to explore 7 psychological signs that you intimidate people without even realizing it. Not because you're aggressive, not because you're trying to dominate anyone, but because certain quiet behaviors naturally challenge the expectations most people carry into every conversation. The first sign is surprisingly simple. You're comfortable with silence. For many people, silence feels awkward. The moment a conversation pauses, they rush to fill the empty space. They repeat themselves. They laugh. They ask another question. Sometimes they even reveal things they never planned to say. Anything to make the silence disappear. But you don't feel that pressure. You're perfectly comfortable taking a moment before speaking. You'd rather think than react. You'd rather say something meaningful than simply say something. To you, silence isn't empty. It's where your thoughts become clear. But the person sitting across from you experiences something completely different. As the silence grows, their mind starts racing. Did I say something wrong? Why aren't they responding? Are they judging me? Without realizing it, they begin answering questions you never asked. Your silence becomes a mirror. Instead of revealing what you're thinking, it reveals what they're thinking. And that's what makes quiet people seem so intimidating. Not because silence is threatening, but because it forces other people to sit alone with their own thoughts. Most people aren't uncomfortable with your silence. They're uncomfortable with what they hear inside their own minds when you stop filling the room with noise. And that's only the beginning. The second sign is that you don't react the way people expect. Most social situations follow an invisible script. Someone complains, and everyone joins in. Someone gets offended, and everyone immediately chooses a side. Someone tries to provoke a reaction, expecting anger, frustration, or at least some kind of emotional response. But that's not how you operate. When tension appears, your first instinct isn't to react. It's to observe. You take a moment. You think. You try to understand what's really happening before deciding how to respond. To you, that's simply being mature. To someone else, it's confusing. They expected your emotions to be easy to influence. Instead, they find someone who refuses to be pulled into unnecessary drama. Suddenly, they can't predict you anymore. And people often mistake unpredictability for power. The third sign is that you ask questions that make people think. Most conversations stay on the surface. People talk about work, the weather, weekend plans, safe topics that don't require much honesty. You naturally move past that, not because you're trying to be deep, but because you're genuinely curious. Instead of asking what someone does, you wonder what motivates them. Instead of accepting the first answer, you quietly ask another question, one that most people have never been asked before. The atmosphere changes. The conversation becomes more personal, more honest. Some people appreciate that. They finally feel understood. Others suddenly become uncomfortable. Because meaningful questions don't just reveal information, they reveal the person answering them. Without realizing it, your curiosity encourages people to look inward. And not everyone enjoys what they find there. That's why you're sometimes described as intense. Not because you speak loudly, but because your conversations leave a lasting impression. The fourth sign is your emotional control. Many people believe confidence means speaking the loudest. Psychology suggests something different. Real confidence often looks remarkably quiet. When someone criticizes you, you don't immediately defend yourself. When someone loses their temper, you don't automatically lose yours. When emotions begin taking over the room, you stay grounded. You've learned that reacting isn't the same as solving. So instead of matching someone else's emotional energy, you choose clarity. That calmness can be surprisingly unsettling. People who rely on emotional reactions expect everyone else to do the same. When you don't, they struggle to understand what you're thinking. Some assume you don't care. Others assume you're hiding something. In reality, you're simply choosing self-control over emotional impulse. And that quiet discipline carries more strength than most people realize. The fifth sign is that you notice what other people miss. While most people are waiting for their turn to speak, you're paying attention. You notice the hesitation before someone answers, the forced smile that disappears too quickly, the change in someone's voice when a certain topic comes up, the confidence they're trying to project, and the insecurity hiding just beneath it. You don't do this because you're trying to analyze people. It's simply how your mind works. You observe before you respond. Ironically, being fully present is becoming increasingly rare, and when someone realizes they're being genuinely noticed, they often feel exposed. Honest people usually appreciate it. They feel understood. But people who are hiding behind a carefully crafted image often become uncomfortable. Without realizing why, they start acting differently around you. They become more cautious, more defensive, more guarded. Not because you said anything intimidating, but because your attention quietly revealed something they were hoping no one would see. The sixth sign is that you don't trust people too quickly. Many people mistake this for being unfriendly, but there's a difference between being closed off and being selective. You don't believe everyone deserves immediate access to your thoughts, your time, or your emotions. Trust, to you, is something that grows through consistency, not through a single conversation. You'd rather have a few genuine relationships than dozens of shallow ones. Some people respect that. Others take it personally. They assume your boundaries are a rejection of them. In reality, your boundaries aren't about pushing people away. They're about protecting your peace. People who benefit from weak boundaries often dislike strong ones. And that's why healthy limits are sometimes mistaken for arrogance. The seventh and final sign is the one that explains all the others. You don't depend on other people's approval. Of course, appreciation feels good. Everyone enjoys being accepted. But your sense of worth doesn't disappear when someone disagrees with you. You don't constantly change your personality to fit the room. You don't chase validation from strangers. You don't feel the need to explain every decision you make. That quiet independence is surprisingly uncommon. And because it's uncommon, it can feel intimidating. Not to emotionally secure people, but to people whose confidence depends on being accepted by everyone around them. Here's the truth. Being called intimidating isn't automatically a compliment. And it isn't automatically an insult either. Most of the time, it's simply a description of how your presence affects someone else's emotional state. You remind them that confidence doesn't have to be loud, that calmness can be stronger than chaos, that silence can speak louder than endless conversation, and that someone who is comfortable with themselves is very difficult to control. So don't force yourself to become louder just to make other people comfortable. Don't pretend to be less thoughtful, less calm, or less authentic. The people who misunderstand you were never looking at the real you in the first place. They were looking at the story they created inside their own minds. The right people will eventually see the difference. They won't mistake your silence for judgment or your boundaries for rejection. They'll recognize something much more valuable. Quiet confidence. If one of these signs felt familiar, let me know which one resonated with you the most in the comments. And if you know someone who's always been misunderstood simply because they're quiet, share this video with them. Sometimes, understanding the psychology behind our behavior changes the way we see ourselves forever.